First of all, thank you, Amy Geist, for being so amazing and inviting us here to be with you all and to perform for the next couple of days. It's especially exciting for me to be back here. I had a really wonderful 3-year experience at Wichita State University, and it's fun to see what's happening here now and to see familiar faces out in the audience. So, so thanks for inviting us, Amy, and thanks for the wonderful introduction. The way we're going to structure our talk today, because there's a lot of students in the audience, it would be a great opportunity to get to talk about our process a little bit more. So we're going to go through works spanning the last decade that we've been working together and talk about them in terms of the content of the work, but really sort of focus on the structure of how we work together collaboratively, how we communicate across distances, and how we work on site together as well. So in each work, if you have questions at any point, you can feel free to ask, or of course at the end, we'll also be open for questions about any sort of specifics of the work, or if you have thoughts about how we work together in collaboration.
So to expand on that, our plan is to not go into great depth into our works, but you can find them on the website. And but we just wanted to start out with talking how we got to become the Bridge Club. And what happened was in 2002, the three of us, Julie, Annie, and I, we were accepted into the University of Colorado's ceramics graduate program, and Emily was already there. And we realized in that particular program, we were allowed to look at a lot of different other kinds of material besides ceramics, besides clay. And so we started understanding that there was an overlap of our interests in objects and our ideas, and that we realized that we could work together in this way, and that this collaboration, when we started doing performance together, it was sort of spontaneous, and that as we still have our own ideas, but where they overlap makes it stronger when we do our collaboration. So it started at the University of Colorado in Boulder.
I would say too that most of it started from the moments, and many of you probably have this experience too, that you're spending a lot of time in the studio, you're spending a lot of time with your colleagues in the studio. You might be going out to dinner a lot, you might be going to get some drinks, you might be going to happy hour a lot, and during those moments that a lot of conversation starts to happen, a lot of camaraderie, and again, those interests start to become more apparent through that social dynamic. And so it very much started in an organic process of us being in this studio. Sometimes people complain a lot about group studios, and one of the things that I really appreciate about our situation is that those studios really fostered a group dynamic that I think facilitated the process of the Bridge Club.
We wouldn't have had this happen if we weren't in a group situation, for sure. So.
There's also a sort of sense also that we all come from object-making backgrounds, and part of what brought us together was our interest in activating those objects and sort of seeing what the potentials of activating objects that were making objects that were altering and integrating those into action, and sort of seeing what sort of meanings and possibilities open up when things were activated or put into motion.
So let's start going through some of the images, because that's a nice segue into the first couple of slides that we have are from a work that we aren't ever really sure whether to call our first work or whether it wasn't quite the Bridge Club's work yet. It was really just an experimentation. Using objects that were made in our individual studios and activating them in space. It happened at a house in Boulder, Colorado. Emily was making these dirt pillows in her studio. Annie was using a lot of pantyhose. Those are the props that you see in that image. We made a video work out of it. We weren't sure what was going to come out of it, just that we wanted to see the objects activated in some way. And while we don't really feel like this as a work was where we wanted to head, the process of working together and working through materials together was of interest to us, and we kept going with that.
And certainly location too was the location was an important aspect to that piece.
This was a house that was in the middle of a very, very highly desirable real estate situation, and it was just left to deteriorate, and the entire top floor was actually full of coyote feces. And so
hence its name, the Coyote Poop House.
That is what it's actually called. It's currently being renovated by the historic department. But what's really interesting, I think, is that even in this early work or experiment, there was this sense of responding to the site itself. So we had these objects, and we had this site that seemed interesting, and we wanted to see what happened when we put those two things together, and they started to talk. And I think it was up for a good couple years.
Yeah. Just a sort of side note on that, we would see there was a dance student who had made a piece at this house also, and we saw our sort of residue from the performance, which is something that you'll sort of see throughout all of our work, that often throughout the performance there's some sort of residue that is left from it, and in this particular situation it was there for a while.
So after graduate school, we all went in different directions. And so maybe, Emily, you want to talk a little bit about
that? This is, I didn't invent this map, but I did work on it a little bit. So this is redistributing the kind of geographic nomenclature that we use. So this is showing where we moved to. So we're in a group studio where we're together all the time. We're seeing each other every day. We're eating lunch together. We're looking at each other's work and starting to make work together. And then all of a sudden, we moved to 4 different locations in 4 different sections of the U.S. And so
3 time zones.
3 time zones. And so suddenly we had to figure out, is this over? Is this, and I think what we found is that it was just the beginning of it. And so we started to collaborate using, I think in those days we used iChat.
We used iChat.
iChat. Is that embarrassing? We used iChat. We found that we could not video chat with each other because it just became a zoo. So we did the actual process of typing out our ideas and responding to each other's ideas became something about both how the conversation unrolled, but then also about how the work developed. And so we began making work from these very separate geographical areas, which is interesting for people who respond to the sites to actually be making work from different areas. And so these next works were the first made from distinct different places.
Right. And this is a wig fitting session, the images that you're seeing now. And also I think it's important to say that we continue that sort of practice of Skype. We use Skype now, we've really upgraded. But we don't video chat and we don't audio chat. That sort of text chatting really works for us as a sort of way of communicating, and that we can archive that. And that's also important to us, that we're not talking over each other, which often happens in kind of group situations. And a lot of the times people will say, oh, collaborating is so difficult, da-da-da-da-da. And maybe collaborating from a distance is hard, but for us it seemed like that has really worked as a structure for us to communicate across those sorts of spaces.
In addition to that, I mean, we have several other modes of communication. These are our weekly or biweekly meetings that we actually formally come together. And so there were also, constant email communication and a really interesting, what is it called, message now? Text message.
Text message.
those things.
Those
Yes.
maybe not to be archived.
Yes. So in this particular work, again, this was the first work that we made from a distance, and this was in Pueblo, Colorado, as you can see up on the screen. The particular sort of action in this performance was the 4 of us sitting around a table drinking out of teacups that contained ore dust from the mountains, the same sort of material that's the residue from mining in the mountains.
And you can see that the continuing theme in our work is that we're wearing wigs, we're altering objects, and we're considering the site.
Some of those choices, this might be a good place to talk about the wigs and some of the other things, but you can keep moving forward on the images. Some of those things initially started intuitively, that we wore the wigs initially. You know, we had various reasons for that. But as we progressed and as the Bridge Club became more of a lasting entity, something we were going to continue to do, some of those basic things had to get resolved for ourselves. So we were asked over and over again early on, why wigs and why 4 women? Why are there 4 of you? And those 2 questions have shaped how we structure our work ever since. That we feel like the wigs give us an anonymity, that we're not for individual specific characters, but we're more of an archetype. That comes back to some of our overlapping interests in our individual studio works, which have to do with gender roles and cultural expectations and the way those change geographically from place to place, which is something we'll talk about with the trailer project that we've got here as well. These images that Emily's got up here now are from pretty early on in our collaboration. When we moved away, when we all 4 went to 4 different directions, we had a couple of performance engagements already scheduled that we came together again. That last one that you saw in Pueblo, the shift work, was one of those. But following that, working in performance, it's not the same as working in a studio where you can have your experimentation hid away privately indoors, and particularly working long distance, we had to come up with ways to make it happen, to make that experimentation continue. So we structured this particular summer what we called a performance residency session, where we went and stayed at Christine's in New York, and we did a whole bunch of different performance activities at specific sites around the area that we were responding to for visceral and material reasons. Some of them, a couple of them, the Voyage Out, this boat piece, and the pool that we saw before, have yielded a lot of good results for us. Having good documentation got us other opportunities, and that's been really important. Some of the other works that we did this week turned into, fodder for hilarity, precisely. Not everything works. Exactly.
We just did it out in public.
I will say, though, that an unexpected twist that happens with this work is that this is we are involved with the Gallery Art Palace in Houston, and this particular image is one that sells like hotcakes.
It's a great image.
And so, yeah, they're small. They're $10. But I think something that we didn't anticipate, that this would become a photograph that then sold in a commercial gallery, isn't something that I think we were thinking about when we weren't wearing our life vests out on this choppy Hudson River day. And so one of those things I think is interesting about our process is that I don't think that we imagined where we were going, but continued to go. And
literally in that boat.
We did continue to go and then struggled back.
And I think that that's another piece to how we work, is that there are times when we have our own ideas, and that ideas that we want to meld together, and then sometimes we have a proposal for a specific site. And so sometimes there's the part that's the site that's really informing the work, and then it's probably 50-50, where there's so much, there's this much site, or it changes, I guess. Sometimes it's 60-40, but those things are both parts.
It feels like site is always important, but sometimes we approach a performance, the site drives it, so we create a performance for the site, and other times we're asked to create a performance, so then we take into consideration geographic and cultural and, political history of that place. And
this particular image is of Emily and I doing a little wig shopping, and then Emily doing a little trying on of wigs.
So our wig replacement hasn't always gone as smoothly as one would hope. These are two.
Failure is a theme.
Failure is always a theme in all art making.
So we did at some point realize that we actually had something that more resembled a dead squirrel on our heads than a wig. And so we tried desperately to replicate the wigs that we had originally gotten, and that was really difficult. And the fear there was that we would not look like ourselves. However, that is actually something that we've evolved, so maybe something we didn't expect, but that this normative action of the wig and the similar clothing translated into we actually weren't these personas, we were actually a persona, so wig shifting felt okay. So we've become a little bit more wig swingers than maybe we originally imagined.
We've branched out a bit. We've tried a few different things on.
Which is good because I think you can see that that is a little bit false advertising, because that is not what that wig looks like.
No. Don't shop for wigs online, by the way.
You don't know what you're going to get.
You need to go to the store. So often when we're on location, as I will refer to it, but when we're wherever we are that we're doing the performance. So for this week we're in Wichita. We'll often that's our working time together too, and so we have to fit in things that we can't do when we're at our separate residences or in our Skype meetings. Like we have to approve each other's wigs, or other props that we need to seek out. And so there's always a lot of errand running, and we become friends with people at like the Home Depot or the local hardware store or the wig shop. Atlanta is a great place to buy wigs, by the way. And so those sorts of things are sort of built into our time when we are together. There's other things that we sort of have to accomplish in that time too. This image again, the map.
So this just the map is broken up, and I hope you will adopt this this language that it's based on a spatial sectioning of the United States. So I think that what we refer to as the Midwest is actually the Mideast. So you can see that it's relabeled there. And so again, we moved. There were some shifts in location. Julie moved from the Mid-North Midwest to the Mid-South Midwest. But it was big because she could now, and Annie moved from Wichita to Houston, and so.
Which I like to refer to Wichita as the center of the country. I know it's not geographically accurate, but I think it's appropriate.
It is actually on the center line, so you're okay.
It is, yeah.
According to my map.
It's a little. It's more like the belly button, which is a good place. It's warm.
But this, again, I think, shifted. So the move put us, again, in 3 different time zones, but the shift in location also changed sort of, certainly our opportunities. It certainly changed, our working system a little bit. And so we used what we had already developed, but then continued to adapt. This performance was done in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was part of the National Performance Network's annual meeting. And it was great because for us, they asked us to do a piece in a hotel room. And what most of the artists did was try to transform the hotel room into some other place. And from our perspective, hey, that's great. This is a hotel room. We'll make a piece about the hotel room. And so that's what this piece actually does.
And this piece allowed us the opportunity to explore the hotel room as a site for performance to happen. But the way that the meeting was structured was that we would do performances, I think, every day. We did 2 performances, 2-hour-long performances. And then the rest of the time, we still wanted people to interact with our work. It was still an opportunity. And so we used that opportunity to create a video installation. And so if somebody else wants to talk about that part, that would be great.
So we had taken images of the performance, us doing our performance independently, and then we projected them in the locations around the hotel room to take our place while we weren't there. And the beauty of it, and it was an unexpected thing, which often happens when we come together to work, something unexpected, was that the ghosts of our images in the hotel room were more beautiful almost than our doing the performance. Than us. It was this ghosty. I know.
We were larger than life projections.
We were larger than life. We were larger than life, and so it was logistically complicated to have 4 projections going at different times, but it really filled out that hotel room installation for the time that we were there. Do you want to add
It
to
also, it wasn't the first time that we used video projection or sound in our work, but it is an illustration of it, that we have increasingly, from where we started, which was strictly performance, worked in a variety of media, including new media. And we've been pretty conscious about that, about being interested in creating works in a way that we don't have to physically all four travel for every work, that we can maintain an active presence in an arts community that isn't quite as temporal as performance, which is our root and what we love. But yeah, I think.
I would say too that this is a something that occurs quite a bit, is that we had to do all the filming on site, which means all of the editing on site, and that's one of the things that is, I think, different about us, is that, or significant about our process, is that we do have to actually go make the work, edit the work, and there's a large amount of activity that happens in sort of the hurdle towards these exhibitions. By the time the exhibition comes, we've usually had a mini residency on the front end. So
There's a lot of work that's done on site, and we've tried to figure out as much ahead of time as possible about the ideas that we're interested in, and then knowing that things change when you're together and being flexible about that as well. And always, I think something that we're also aware of as people who are collaborating is that we try to do what's best for the work. Sometimes we like ideas about, certain things, or materials or props, whatever those things might be, but trying to sort of set those things aside for what feels like it will make the most successful work. The next piece that we're looking at right now, Natural Resources, was performed at Lawndale Art Center in Houston, and again, this piece gave us an opportunity to do a live performance for the reception of the exhibit, but then also leave behind installation as residue for I think it was the 6-week exhibition.
And this was also why we're showing you this little diagram, is because we realized that what would help us to organize the performance itself was to set a kind of loose grouping of rules. And so what you're looking at there was the loose rules that we had.
And so the lines, the sort of pattern that you see, the dashed lines, are the pattern that we would walk through. So we were dipping these objects in either milk or in oil, and then they would be sort of carefully placed into the jars that were on the shelves in the first image, and I think in the next image as well. And so there was some sort of logic or structure to the way that we moved throughout the space, that if the audience stayed long enough, that they would sort of pick up on that structure or that pattern.
So that pattern is something that we came up with ahead of time, and perhaps, it's not explicitly available to the audience, but again, that if we understand what we're doing, then it's likely that the audience is going to pick up on that there is a pattern and there's a logic that exists behind these actions.
And as part of the residue that was left behind, we'd also done a recording. We were all wearing heels throughout the performance, and so there was a sound of the walking that was also left in the space. So the viewer who only saw the installation, for example, would also have this audio component to go along with the objects that were residue. The next piece, Shell. Does anybody want to talk about Shell?
Shell is one of my favorites.
Tallahassee and all.
This is another example of where we had this idea of creating this structure that we would exist inside. So usually performance art happens on a stage available to the audience, right? And so this was a little bit obstructing that. We created a box and then scrimmed it with a screen and projected on it. We went there, filmed the Tallahassee landscape, and then projected that landscape on the box. So when somebody comes in, they're actually seeing the landscape from the outside that they just came in from. The other component of it was that as they got closer, their shadow obscured the projection, but then they were able to see us inside the box. And
It was great because a lot of people would come in and it just seemed like a projection on a sort of structure that somebody had built. And there was a lot of, we, of course, inside the box, we could hear what the responses were. And so it was really very interesting to have them, oh my God, there's someone in there.
Yeah,
it was this really wonderful.
And they've got a machete.
and we did have a machete.
And when you think about theater breaking down,
dangerous. I don't know if you guys know that.
When you think about the theater breaking down the fourth wall, we were just creating four walls around us. and if you want to lure your audience in, you veil yourselves, and that was a lure. People wanted to get in. They wanted to see what was going on. That
There were a few people trying to crawl underneath.
Yeah.
Great.
This next guy being sort of an opposite in our approach to audience engagement. This was a work, it was a festival context. We were brought in by an Atlanta arts organization that puts on a very large arts event. I think they told us there were 16,000 people in attendance. Happens on a street at night. They'd commissioned several works by different arts groups that were largely stationary, and the crowd moved between them, and we decided to approach it via the opposite and to move through this crowd. The work was titled Loose Snare, based on our interest in trying to create small, quiet instances within a really loud, noisy crowd. We had audio projecting from our bodies, which we've used in a number of different performances. We refer to it as thigh pod when we put it down in our Spanx. Yeah, that's right. But the audience would have to listen very closely and close to our bodies to hear this quiet classical music that was coming, and simultaneously we were using these ear listening devices that we had fabricated to visually try to hear something quiet within a noisy environment.
This was definitely our largest audience.
And drunkest.
And drunkest
I'm gonna put it out
over
there.
the evening, absolutely. Sort of devolved over the hours. It was a 3-hour performance.
Perhaps the most bodily contact with the audience.
Absolutely.
But don't try to beat that, okay? I would say, too, that it's one of the interests that we have is how to engage the audience in a really different way. So this implicated the audience in that it literally made them the center of a performance, and as they figured that out, they evacuated and then creating these little pockets. That's the same thing that happens in the previous piece where the audience is actually implicated in the making of the piece. So they become part of it literally for a secondary audience.
Mm-hmm.
We might bump ahead a couple to talk about the trailer.
Yeah.
Oh, let's hit the.
Maybe
These
show
are
video.
so good. Just imagine what we're doing.
Let's show the medium
Let's
video.
show the medium video, yeah. So the video we're going to show you is from a performance that was at Art Palace Gallery in Houston, Texas, but it was also commissioned for the Currents International New Media Festival last summer in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I'll leave it at that and let you guys watch the video. It's just a minute or so.
This might be a good time to also say that we typically don't talk during our performances. So I'm going to talk over our performance.
When we initially conceived of this work, it was for a commercial gallery, which was a new spatial context for us. So we were thinking about the way that artwork is presented in galleries, the on-the-wall, the white space, the spare treatment of the art objects. The work is titled Medium, which refers both to artistic materials, or what artworks are created from, and a sort of spiritual or psychic or quasi-religious medium, the ability to intuit information from otherworldly sources and the way that art making is sometimes perceived in the same capacity. The interesting thing about moving that work from the Art Palace Gallery in Houston, where it was originally performed, to the current New Media Festival, is that in the new media context, where everything was really, really techy, and we had a DVD player. it became and we did hang on the wall. It's true. There was a sound component. That it became a really about media itself, about digital media itself, and how that can be overbearing or offer too much, and this becoming a quiet instance within all of that. And we were interested in the way that context shifted.
And after the festival goers would be all around the other technology and then come into a room and look at us and think, and many times we heard people say, "Are they robots? Are they robots?" And it was
And I assure you, we weren't.
and we weren't even trying to
only
be
at
that
a new
still,
media
you
festival
know,
did they think
right?
we were
That was yeah. So we're gonna move on to so what we brought here to you in Wichita is our little trailer, and so the trailer was conceived many years ago. I don't know if you want to talk about that. It's been long coming.
It's been long coming. This is our 10-year-old idea that only in the last 2 years has actually come into fruition, and it's gone through transitions, and
At first it was a truck.
Yeah.
It's nothing like this.
we rented it. But this idea of a mobile installation and performance space that we could take to different places and allow it to create a kind of continually layered environment with each performance / place that we would visit is an idea that we had for a while, and then this sort of became a more realized form of that. And so what we're showing you right now are some sort of process shots. We did a lot of renovations to the interior of the trailer, which you'll get to see firsthand, and a taxidermy cat you'll also get to see firsthand. And so like through doing that, we did that all long distance. And so trying to figure out what kinds of fabrics, what things are important in this very small 10x6 space.
And I think initially, too, being a site-specific artist, you go somewhere, you create a piece, and then many of them are very difficult to take away from that context. And so there's not a lot of opportunity to continue or refine or change in that sense. The trailer really gives us this opportunity to, in one sense, have some longevity to a project, continually to go back to it, to change, to alter it, but also to continue to work in a site-specific way, so that while there's a continuation or a threading through of ideas from one site to another, there's also a new piece that's created for each site. So it kind of layers the two things that I think are really interesting to us.
And part of the project also is there's the sort of performance component, and then also this archiving component that we've been doing along with it, and that's the part that really kind of engages each site. And so here you see this was in Houston, where we launched the project last year, and so in each place that we go, which we're doing this evening at the Ulrich, is asking people different questions or requesting some sort of information from them. And so in Houston, we were asking about specific memories people had with objects. In Tulsa, we asked people to trace maps and show us places that were important to them or where they were from. And in that and we've also asked people to actually give us physical objects if they're willing to. And part of that is an exchange that from the viewer and the audience that we're sort of encountering and interacting with, that we then take and we integrate into our performances in some way. Part of what we're interested in that exchange is that there's a little bit of risk involved with our viewer. They don't exactly know what we're going to do with that information or with that object.
And I think that carries through the way that a camper, when you go new places, and there's things that are specific to a location, and there's a kind of risk about security and insecurity when you're taking your camper, you're making a new home or new place, what's familiar and what's unfamiliar. And I think that when we're asking for stories and we're asking for object contributions, it's not that it's a linear transference where if somebody gives us an object, then we're gonna do a performance about.
We're not gonna act out their story.
We're not acting out the story. That's right. And so that's a risk. That's the unsafe aspect of it.
This was from the inaugural performance, really, that we did with the trailer in Houston in March of 2013. It was at the Lawndale Art Center, and it was parked adjacent to a sculpture garden, so we acknowledged that sculpture garden as a site where art is presented. And we took some of the objects, or at least what were perceived to be objects that had been donated to us, and went through a sort of ritual processing of those objects. That's what you're seeing here. It also might be a good place to note that for each performance that we do with the trailer, we structure it entirely differently, taking into account the site where we are, who the audience will be, what kinds of information we've collected recently.
This was at the same time as the National Ceramic Conference, so.
We deemed it appropriate to take ceramic objects and smash them.
And
Buried them in the yard at the sculpture garden.
I would also like to say that cow came from Wichita. Another shout out to you all. I think we could probably wrap it up, and we could take any questions. I think we've fulfilled our time.
Let's say really quick about our archiving activities this evening. That the information that we're asking from you all while we're here in Wichita has to do with objects and home. What kinds of objects make a place a home? Or is there an object that's special to you that you've taken with you every time you move and it wouldn't be home without it? So we're asking both for narratives, for sort of written or verbal information about these things, or objects themselves or instances of similar objects if you have those that you're willing to part with. And we will be outside of the Ulrich from 5 to 7 today, correctly? And we would love to have this from any of you. And if you can't make that time, the same question is also on our project website, which is bridgeclubtrailer.com. And there's a form on there where we collect information as well.